What is up, bosses? Since most of you are entrepreneurs out there, you probably recognize this sound. That is the sound of another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify is our newest sponsor here at Invest Like a Boss. They're a platform designed for anyone to sell anywhere, giving entrepreneurs like myself, or even Sam and Johnny, all three of us have used Shopify at some point for one of our businesses. They can customize all your needs, give you a great-looking online store that brings your ideas to life, and they even have tools to manage your day-to-day and drive sales. Make your idea real with endless possibilities. I'm going to tell you all about Shopify during the break, but if you want to get a head start, just head over to shopify.com/iLab. Now, this is important, the ILAB. Make sure it's all lowercase, and you'll get a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. You can start selling on Shopify today. You just got to go to shopify.com/ILAB. That's shopify.com/iLab. Like I said, I'll tell you more in a few minutes, but let's get this episode started.
Welcome to the Invest Like a Boss podcast.
I'm Sam Marks.
And I'm Johnny FD. We're self-made entrepreneurs who invest our own money and use modern technology to invest like a boss.
Join us each week for exclusive interviews with our network of modern investors, business owners, and multimillionaires to discover new ways to invest our hard-earned cash.
Swaddy Krab, Sam. Welcome to episode 216 of the Invest Like a Boss podcast. How you doing, buddy?
Johnny speak Thai good.
Yeah. Nit noi.
Wasn't that from the movie Meet the Fockers? He's like,
oh,
Dad doesn't speak Thai. Oh, your dad speak Thai good.
You know what? Actually, I probably completely forgotten my Thai. I used to be decent enough to get by, especially at restaurants. I'm sure I could pick it back up, but if you put me on the spot now, I wouldn't be able to say anything.
It's always one of those languages that I was like, when I heard a foreigner speaking Thai, I'm like, yo, that's so creepy.
Yeah.
But now I regret not learning it because you always know enough just to be polite. And I think that's really important. But then I never learned more than that. Yep. And now it's like, it's such a beautiful language. It's so delicate, you know, compared to Chinese, where like, if anyone's speaking Chinese, even if they're having like a nice romantic conversation, it sounds like they're in a fight.
Yeah, but
like Thai, even if they're in a fight, it sounds like they're like
being polite
conversation.
Yeah, but also depends 100% on the region of China they come from, because like, you know, like Taiwanese people speak like not all of them, but most Taiwanese people like have a very soft accent as well.
Yeah, it's all that Tai Chi.
Yeah, could be. You know, one of the bucket list items that I regret not doing when I was younger is the Saigon to Hanoi, Vietnam motorbike trip.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's rough. Like from everyone I've known who's done it, they said it's been fun. It's an adventure, but it's rough and your bike will break down every day. Like every other day, something will happen to your bike, even if you buy a Honda, because the Hondas there are made in Vietnam and they're not very reliable.
Well, I have a very quick story on that because I actually flew there about 4 years ago to do that trip, except I was starting in Hanoi with a buddy. And we were in Hanoi. And for anyone that's been to Vietnam and traveled north to south, you know the north is a lot different than the south. And there's a lot of history there and still quite a bit of tension with foreigners in the north. And we were sitting at a bar just having a beer. And I went to the bathroom. Like we were going to buy the bikes the next day and start the trick. And we were sitting at a bar and I go to the bathroom and I come out and my buddy's head is on the table and he's got blood running all over him. And I'm like, what happened? And he looks up at me and I see glass around his head and someone had came and bottled him, just taken a bottle and smashed it. And dude, he had a massive gash on the back of his head. And when the person followed through with the bottle, it cut his neck. So imagine it hits him from behind, smashes the bottle on his head, and the follow through cuts his neck. Like, I mean, luckily it wasn't a deep cut, but it like went right over the jugular. It was spooky, man. And so, you know, I went to the hospital and then we're just like, all right, I think that's a bad way to start trip. So we just took a train to Saigon and like cut the trip 3 weeks short.
That's insane. And it was just some random Vietnamese guy that just like didn't like you know, your conversation.
Like the way we looked. Yeah. Maybe heard us talking. I have no idea, but we were after we were thinking, and I was like, it was another one of those things that just made me think like, man, this would never happen in Thailand.
I don't know, except for in certain places. Like I've seen guys get bottled or like beat, jumped like in like the Full Moon Party or Phuket, like kind of these places where a lot of tourists hang out. And to be fair, normally it's, like kind of some drunk British guy or drunk American guy making a big scene and disrespecting the local Thais.
Yeah.
But it's always, at least in Thailand, it's almost always the foreigner's fault. Like I would say it's always the foreigner's fault.
For sure. I mean, if you step back and look at the big picture, Thais are like the most, in this regard, are probably the most patient people in the world, because so many idiots go there and just act like total fools. And if that happened like in the US, if it was like a bunch of like Spanish guys coming over to and just acting like idiots and getting drunk all the time and like, littering and stuff like that, like there would be fights all the time between the locals and the tourists. But in Thailand, they're just very, I don't know, they're just very patient in that regard, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. But there's, every human has a limit, and unfortunately,
and when Thais hit that limit,
they go wild.
Fireworks.
Yeah. I do miss it though. I mean, literally that was my home for the last, since 2008 until about 2 years ago. So I have a special place in my heart with Thailand. I still have a connection. Hopefully I'll go back sometime in the future, but I don't know when.
I agree. It's that special place. They are special people. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about an organization that's doing really good work in the region. But I thought this would be a good episode to just hear from Marc Jenni's standpoint, who runs Child's Dream, what they're trying to tackle and what they see in the industry and, where the industry can be improved.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a lot of questions that we're going to ask on this episode that applies to all charities. One is, how do you know your money is actually going towards the root cause and not just towards admin costs or private jets or even things like fundraising? Also why some types of charities, just need to spend more money than others, and why it's okay if some have a higher burn rate than others. How to choose the right charity. And also, I think it's I think it's a good topic for this podcast, because I think a lot of us are in a good position financially, or will be in the future. And for, whatever reason, at a certain point, we all just want to give more, or we feel like the need to give more.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully we all find causes that are greater than just making money and indulging in in pleasures of the flesh. I think it's a path that most people find themselves on, and it's not always easy. It can take a lifetime to figure it out. So that's part of the reason for this episode. And stay tuned until the outro. We're going to talk about how we invested, or actually we're able to move stock into a donor advised fund, capture the tax-free benefit, the tax benefit this year, while still not having to deploy the money to capital to charities in this year. So that was pretty cool. Something we learned from the Charity Vest episode that we're putting into application. So stay tuned to the outro, but without further ado, let's hear it from Marc Jenni of Child's Dream.
This week's sponsor of Invest Like a Boss is Shopify. Shopify is more than a store. You can connect with your customers, drive sales, manage your day-to-day, and Shopify accepts all major payment methods. They have thousands of integrations and third-party apps, from on-demand printing to accounting to advanced chatbots and so much more. You can join the over 2 million entrepreneurs that are on Shopify, making sales every 28 seconds. In fact, there's another one. So, like I said, Sam, Johnny, and myself have all personally used Shopify. It's so easy to get started. You can supercharge your knowledge, your sales, and your success. And to help you with that success, you're going to get 14 days free and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. All you got to do is go to shopify.com/iLab. That's shopify.com/ILAB. Make sure that iLab is all lowercase. You can start selling on Shopify today. One more time, you just got to go to shopify.com/iLab. Get your free 14-day trial.
Welcome back, everyone. I am sitting across the virtual computer from Marc Jenni of Child's Dream and excited to welcome you on the show, Marc.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for giving me this platform.
Absolutely. We had a great conversation going back a couple months in Chiang Mai, and I really wanted to capture that for our listeners and also expand on it. I never get tired of speaking with you guys and learning more about the industry and a lot of also including your impact and what you guys are doing regionally and in a region that's important to a lot of our listeners for various reasons. So I wanted to start the episode just talking a little bit about Child's Dream and kind of how you guys got started and sort of narrowed down your choice when it comes to which problem in the world to solve.
Okay. Actually, it all came out of a really crazy idea. You know, I was in banking, I was in finance for close to 20 years as a private banker with a major Swiss bank, and mainly my last years I was working in Asia, in Singapore and Hong Kong. And my co-founder, Daniel, he was also in finance. He was not in private banking. He was in asset management for a couple of years, also with the same major Swiss bank. And he was also like working in Korea, in Singapore, in Hong Kong for many years. And somehow out of two different reasons, we decided to quit independently from each other. We wanted to do something a bit more meaningful, something nicer with our lives. And Daniel quit and came up here to Chiang Mai to volunteer in a very small grassroots NGO. And for me, I just wanted to get a mid-career break and say, like, I want to do something totally different. I have no idea yet what. But given my title in the bank, I was put out into the street after I resigned, but I had 6 months notice. So the bank still needed to pay me for another 6 months. And the same was with Daniel. So I started to enjoy my life. I came to Thailand, and then Daniel just called me one day and said, hey, come up to Chiang Mai. I have an idea. I really, really need to talk to you. So I took the train from Bangkok to Chiang Mai. It took me 12 hours. It was a really, really nice time. I had a couple of beers on board and some food. And then I arrived here in Chiang Mai, and I did not like that town at all. And then Daniel told me, hey, I have a great idea. Let's establish our own foundation. You have no plans. I want to do this. Please help me. And my initial reaction was, this guy is totally bonkers, you know? I mean, he's a chartered financial analyst. I have a master's in finance. We don't have kids. We don't have any experience in social work. But then somehow, over many evenings and days of talking and many bottles of wine at the end of the day, I said, okay, let's do this. Let's give it a try. And so that's what I did. I started to help him to build up Child's Dream. But I was much more intrigued, not so much intrigued by altruism or by the work we are doing. I was intrigued by setting something up which is just on a plain white piece of paper. We didn't know how that thing is called, what we do, where the money comes from, whom we shall help. We had no idea. And I was actually intrigued by setting up that kind of business. And Daniel, obviously, he was coming totally from the altruistic side. So, and then we started. And now nearly 20 years later, we are a team of over 60 colleagues in 4 countries, and we do have a huge impact. So I thought like it's a little bit of I'm still living my dream. It's a little bit of a dream story because it worked out. We had no idea whether it works out or not, but we were in the privileged situation that financially we were kind of stable for a couple of years because we earned our money in the bank. So it was worth a try, and it worked out.
How has Child's Dream mission evolved, I guess, in those 20 years? Did you guys start kind of with the same view and mission as you're at now, or has that evolved considerably?
It has evolved dramatically, actually. The way we started is we bought ourselves a Volkswagen bus, you know, these old hippie buses. And that was our first project car. And then what we did in the first couple of months is we were just driving around in the north of Thailand. And then, so it happened that we ended up in Mae Sai, and Mae Sai is that very infamous border crossing into Myanmar. Mm-hmm. And we were looking around Mesai and we saw so many kids in the streets, and you could see they are not Thai children, they were Burmese children, they were dirty, they were begging, we didn't really understand what they are doing. And so we started to stay for a while in Mesai and looked around and found out actually these kids are mostly into drug trafficking. So what they did is they were crossing the border and the river up there because nobody really checked them. And in their clothes, in their t-shirts, there was some drugs kind of woven in. And that's how they went back and forth. And in the beginning, many of these kids got a little bit of money from the traffickers, but then after a while, they made them addicts, obviously, so that they keep coming back. So we followed that trail and were wondering, are there any projects who help these kids? And we found a number of initiatives around Mesai who took these kids into shelters and tried to give them an education. But it was also a little bit of an uphill battle because kids were running away again into the streets, because it was also fun to be free for these children in the age of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, Mm-hmm. And anyway, to make it not too long, this initial story, we started to support shelters in Mesai, in this area in the Chiang Rai province, who took care of these kids. And we did this in the first couple of months. Is we built them water systems, accommodation, bigger rooms, bigger kitchens, and so on. But after a while, whenever Daniel and I talked with each other, we said, like, strangely, there are more and more kids coming. These shelters are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, this is not really sustainable. We can't empty Myanmar and we can't empty Laos to just take all these kids into these shelters and give them something. So we started to venture into Myanmar and into Laos from out of there. Myanmar was only possible to go to Takhilet on the other side. But there you see where these kids were coming from. And the same in the Laos side. And then we started solve that problem at the root. You know what I mean? We have to provide education to those kids, to those poor families back home in Myanmar and in Laos and not in Thailand, because otherwise there is a constant stream of kids. So we started to build a little school in Takhilet. We started to venture into Laos, and then our thinking started to change. Then we started to realize we can't really change the drug trafficking or the human trafficking, but what we can do is we can reduce the supply side of children. We will not be able to change the demand side because it's out of control, and this is also not our mandate. But by providing education as close from home or in their home, we can really avoid kids crossing borders and kids becoming victims of trafficking or victims of whatever kind of child abuse. And this is how our mandate then evolved, and we really, really became a very traditional, in the beginning, educational NGO. And we did this for maybe the first 7-8 years of our existence before we then became even more comprehensive and said it's not just the education, which is still today a very important part, but it's actually at the end of the day community development. So we do develop communities via the major intervention of education.
That was a big eye-opener for me. And where do you see the majority of human trafficking flowing? Is it whether it's fishing vessels, or I guess the real common one you see in Thailand is basically construction labor, right?
It is construction labor, but there it is a little bit, you have to distinguish a little bit between what is really slavery and what are these 3D jobs, these dirty, demeaning and dangerous jobs. Because if a young migrant, for example, works in these 3D jobs, the demeaning, dangerous and dirty, at least often they get paid. They just have no protection. They have no legal protection because very often they are illegal in the country or in any given country. They're not crossing legally into Thailand, for example. And in the beginning, most of them will be illegal here until some of them get legalized and are then becoming registered migrants. But if you're not registered, you are more abused because you are valued by any employer for your price because you're cheap and not necessarily for your skills. And this is something where we work heavily against it with many of our vocational training centers. We do not need to create the next president of these countries, but we need to give these young people certain skills, certain, not just hard skills like how to work, but skills like soft skills, like how to be on time, how to dress, how to write a CV, how to integrate into a working process, so that these young people are ultimately valued for their skills and not valued for their price. Because if you're valued for your price, you will always find a job. There's always somebody who hires you for a day for $2. A day, not an hour a day. And this is something which is also abuse. It's not really slavery, but it's abuse. You abuse the situation of somebody who is vulnerable because they are hungry, they need a job. Yeah. Or maybe they are fleeing their country for economical reasons, or at the moment again for political reasons when they're coming from Myanmar. So this is really something, again, humans are always abusing others. You're always taking advantage of somebody who is weaker than you. And I think education again and again is the only thing which brings people out of this vicious cycle.
And so how do you guys focus on, or I guess where your operations focus with regards to education, whether it be building schools or providing financial support for education elsewhere?
We have basically, let's say, two major interventions. First of all, we have one big problem in the Mekong Sub-Region, and these are out-of-school children. And for many people in the West, this is something unbelievable, that you can have out-of-school children in these countries. Even in Thailand, we have out-of-school children. Not that many, because Thailand is a fairly rich country. But in Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos, you have huge number of children who are out of school, meaning they do not go to school at all. They will become adults or youth without ever having been to school. And this is a problem which we are addressing with building schools and building boarding houses and working with communities all over the area in order to provide educational facilities. Now you can say this is the responsibility of the government. Yes, but if the government does not have any money or not enough money, like Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, belonging to the poorest country and still to the least developed countries in the world, there is simply not enough money for this kind of infrastructure. So we do pair up with the governments, with the Ministry of Education, and try to really broaden access to education, that children, regardless of their ethnicity and regardless where they come from, of their poverty level or whatever, they should be able to have access to a school building, access to quality of education. This is something where we really try to solve the problem for the broad masses. So really for hundreds of thousands of children in the region. But then this is only one part. Right? Then kids, when they are finished with their basic education in the age of 16, 17, they're still not adults and they're still in a very vulnerable situation. Yeah. And this is when we come in and help them with what I said before, with vocational training centers, for example, to help them to kickstart their young adult, to really grow into not being abused, because mostly they're not with parents anymore in that age. So they get sucked into the labor market quickly and again into the DDD, dangerous, demeaning, and dirty labor market. And we want to really avoid this via these vocational training programs.
Can you give us an idea of how many schools or establishments you've built since you guys were founded back 20 years ago, I guess?
I think we have built up over 400 education facilities, mostly schools. It's a lot. Yeah, it's really a lot. When you look at our impact report, at any given year, I would say there are about 250,000 children in one of our interventions, whether it's a school, a boarding house, whether they get something on the healthcare side, or we call this touch points. So this is there are 250,000 kids at any given time profiting from various different kind of interventions. And since we started 18, 19 years ago, we are already at over 1 million kids. And some of them obviously are other adults today and do not really get any support from us anymore, because we have hopefully achieved our goal and brought them on the right track.
It's incredible work, and it's also actually very sad to think, like, if you guys weren't there, and there wasn't those extra 400 educational facilities that have been built in the region, like how much worse off the region could be. And I can't help but think, as you're telling me this, I'm so happy for the work that you guys have done. But at the same time, I almost feel like the local governments are just like, well, we'll just let them do the work. Like, why should we invest in schooling if Child's Dream is going to come in and help us build schools? Like, I'll just keep more money for myself, type of thing, you know?
I know what you mean. I mean, there we are actually getting to the topic of corruption, which is obviously rampant in all the countries here in Southeast Asia. They are not faring well on the corruption statistic of Transparency International. But I mean, in the case of Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, Myanmar not for the time being, because they are just in the middle of a military takeover and there is a war situation in the country. But before that, and Laos and Cambodia, we are really working through the Ministry of Education, because we do not believe that building up private education system is sustainable for the country. So what we want to do is we want to cooperate with the government and really build schools together or for the Ministry of Education, that those schools become government schools. The reason for this is really sustainability. And on the other hand, it's not our problem that these kids do not have education, it's the government's problem. And if the government want to advance the country, they really have to invest in education. And then it comes again back to poverty. There is simply not enough money in a country like Laos to build enough schools in every remote corner. So what then happens, you get this rural-urban divide in education, that the government is favoring bigger settlements or bigger cities. So for example, the capital, or then provincial capitals or district capitals. This is often as far as support, financial support by the government goes. And then there is no more money to be spent. Yeah. So this is where we come in and work with the government by building the schools in very, very remote areas where the government support simply does not reach, because the national yearly budget is empty by the time they have done what they do or what they aim to do in the more urban centers. And we have to avoid this, because if we only have education in the urban centers, we have this tremendous educational gap between urban and rural areas. And we see this in Thailand, for example. Education in Chiang Mai and Bangkok is far better than in hill tribe villages somewhere, despite it's the same curriculum.
All right. Well, we often talk about, even the same questions seem to arise with myself and other people who are either giving or considering giving. And it's always about the potential inefficiencies and not knowing exactly where those dollars are getting to. But from your perspective, when you look at, let's just say, charitable organizations on a whole, do you think most of them are fairly efficiently run?
I think it's the opposite around. I think we are in an industry which is highly inefficient. And we are really trying to fight against this, Daniel and I. You have on one side the very, very big players, some very often funded by the Global Fund or by governments or whatever. These are huge NGOs working all over the world, We need them, but they are not the most efficient ones. Often big NGOs are also doing a lot on the advocacy side, because they have this kind of leeway with governments. They are big and powerful, and they can sometimes move mountains or influence governments for the better. So big NGOs have definitely a place in this industry, but they are not the most efficient ones. Even when you go to all these state-funded USAID or Swiss Development Corporation or AusAid in Australia or whatever the name is, they are not really so efficient. Because the people who work there are highly paid professionals who really know what they do. So I would say it's the part of the industry which is done with less heart, with I wouldn't say unprofessional at all, but this professionalism just costs a lot of money, to build up these networks and to have these big NGOs. So they are not so efficient, but we need them. This is one side. And then you have the millions and hundreds and thousands of very, very small grassroots NGOs where somebody just has a great idea and want to help. And yes, this is really nice. It's nice to have a lot of people in our industry, and philanthropy is the biggest industry in the world, but probably also the most fragmented and one of the most unprofessionally run ones. But you have so many small interventions of good people who really want to help, and they keep on inventing the wheel over and over and over again. And many times also, I think, maybe when I look at why is Charles Streamick successful, why did we become successful and have a really huge impact over the last 20 years? I mean, I think it's a combination between brain and heart. Daniel and I, we are two bankers. So first of all, we know where money comes from, how it's earned and how it should be spent, and how cost control works, how procurement policy works, how accounting works, how important transparency and auditing is, and all these kind of things, how important reporting is. So I think knowing this business side of the industry, and then kind of combining this with your heart and mind. I mean, I feel very strongly about what we are doing, so I'm really passionate. I'm a passionate person about what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing and helping kids and helping communities. And I think that combination really makes a difference. This combination is really important. And I think this is something which we have achieved. Which many smaller ones, it's not enough for me to just have a good heart. You really also need to know how to deal with money, how to have processes in the organization. We are highly process driven, and you need to be process driven, because if you do not know how to do this, if you do not know how to run a business, there is so much wastage around of money. And unfortunately, this is something which is happening all over the place all the time.
Well, I can see actually that was one that I didn't see coming was sort of these new NGOs popping up that are, you get a couple of people, they're passionate, they want to make a difference. They go out, they start an NGO, let's just say they raise $1 million from friends and family. But then there's like this ramp up period, I would imagine, where like you got to get established, you get yourself offices, you have to network, you have to make contacts, you have to figure out how to deploy that money. And during that ramp up period, I'm sure a lot of the money is actually lost. It's burned like in operational costs of just getting set up and established. And then if the whole thing fades in a few years, or even 5 or 10 years, because they lost their passion or they've already kind of checked that box, I can see that now being basically a big waste of funds, versus if those monies were instead put into an organization that was already had the infrastructure and had ways to deploy the money efficiently. And I mean, I can see that from my own standpoint, where like, hey, I want to get in, I want to make a difference, I want to start something, but just knowing my history, I tend to get in things and go really hard for about 3-4 years, and then I'm like, all right, time to switch it up and do something else. So you are seeing a lot of that kind of, you had used the word reinventing the wheel, but a lot of new organizations popping up and basically doing the exact same thing that an established organization and maybe in that region is already doing.
Absolutely. We see this often, and often these organizations, as you said, a couple of years down the road, they silently disappear again. And it's just a waste of money at the end of the day. But what happens is you should never forget the philanthropic industry or the NGO industry where we are working is a pity industry. So many people give you money because out of pity. And what happens then is, and we hear this a lot after 20 years, even sometimes from our donors who say like, yeah, but I have given you so much money, you are successful, you have a certain size. We also have to help other NGOs, smaller ones, And and in the same sentence, some of these people even say like, I know you're my favorite one, you're the best. We know you have the biggest impact cost ratio. You only spend about 5% of your entire money on administration, or I think last year it was 5.5%. So we are extremely efficient. So really 95% of the money goes into the direct help. But we still hear it that people say like, we also have to support smaller ones. And I always say like, but you wouldn't do this with a restaurant, right? You always go to your favorite restaurant where the quality and the taste and the price is absolutely what you're looking for, and you're not going as a patron to a restaurant which you don't like just out of pity because it's always empty and you feel sad for the owner of that restaurant. You wouldn't go eating there, right? Nobody would do this. But why is this very, very common in the philanthropic industry? And we call this syndrome spray and pray. You just take water and you spray it all over the industry and pray that it's going well. And I think this is not well. Sometimes donors are not taking enough time to really realize that philanthropy or this industry is a highly professional industry, and all you should do is you should look for performance. You do this in your investments, right? Why are you not looking for performance in your philanthropic investment?
Yeah, well, I want to get to that point in a second, because I think that's a very important point, and I think there's not enough clarity on how to actually look up that performance. But you see this stuff. I think when you really start paying attention, you kind of start seeing some of these inefficiencies firsthand. I think a lot of people are familiar with at least the rumors of, when the earthquake in Haiti happened and like billions of dollars poured into that country, but yet still like 2 years after the fact, like most people were still living in tents. And there's rumors that basically a lot of that money was just basically went into the hands of a few people at a governmental level. I'm not sure if that's true or all, but these are things like you hear, and it kind of sucks the soul out of giving, because who wants to donate 10 grand to Haiti and then hear that rumor? Like you almost don't want to give again, in a sense. And for me, it was when I went to Cambodia, and I was looking up some of the donations and giving statistics in Cambodia, and it was like an insane amount of money was going into Cambodia each year and from philanthropic sources. But then you go to Cambodia and it's like, I mean, it's one of the most poor countries you could ever imagine. And it's not a population like to the scale of Thailand of like 80 million people. I think Cambodia is like 15 or 20 million people. So you would think if all that money was deployed properly, everyone in Cambodia would have a good education. Everyone would have housing and things like this. But instead you kind of see this row of NGOs like in the capital that don't seem like they're being operated with any type of efficiency at all. And it's like, as a giver, or even from your standpoint, how can you measure performance? How can you know where the money that you're contributing is going to a good cause? Because I think that's a barrier for so many people that are currently giving or on the or would like to be giving in the future.
I think there are 2-3 angles to that question. One is obviously what is very important for every NGO or for everybody who spends money which does not belong to them, like us. This money does not belong to us. It's donor money. So we have a very high responsibility. So by default, we are obliged to have impact measurement on a year-by-year basis, and being able to highlight and to publish the impact we are having. And impact, there are different people sometimes take this wrongly. You asked me how many schools we build. I mean, it's over 400, but building 400 schools is the output and not the outcome. And the output of 400 schools still does not mean that there is any positive outcome out of this. So, but you need to be able to measure as an NGO, and for this you need a certain size. So if you're a five soul NGO, you will not have money to pay somebody or to pay a team who does impact measurement for you. But you must measure the outcome and not just the output. You do measure the output, sure. You see this in the annual report. But the outcome, for example, when we talk about the scholarship program, the outcome are graduation rates, continuation rates, or employment rates after study, or what kind of jobs are they going into. And this needs a lot of skills, and this needs a lot of money actually also. It's costly to analyze this. But I think for somebody who is considering donating, I think ask your favorite NGO whether they can highlight the impact in an impact report or in an impact sheet, or whether they can really show you what did they achieve over the last 10, 15 years? Because it's not about building schools, but it's about educating children. The building schools is only the tool to educate the kids. But how do you measure whether kids ultimately are better educated or whether kids really go to school 12 years after you have built schools?
Right.
So to measure all this is a very important point where donors should consider, and just talk to your NGO and ask, can you highlight this? Can you show us this? And not just, we had 700 scholars and 500 schools. That's an output, but not an outcome. So
that's an interesting point.
That's one thing which I consider as very important. Another one is ask your NGO what is the cost basis of the NGO. How much money do they spend, for example, on fundraising? How much money do they spend on administration, like overhead costs? And you see a lot in these figures. And when we look at the Swiss average, since we are a Swiss NGO at the end of the day, in Switzerland, I think the industry average is 24 or 23% of money is spent on administration overhead. And this is considered low, actually, not too high. The US is far higher, I think. I couldn't give you the figure, but there are NGOs, they spend half of their money on administration. So analyze this, look into an annual report of your NGO. I mean, if they don't have an annual report, then something is very weird. But I mean, if they have an annual report, you should be able to figure out very quickly how much money do they spend given their expenses or given their income. How much do they spend for salaries? As said, with us is normally below 6%, which is really, really efficient. But even 12%, 15% is still efficient. Don't be put off by this figure. It's still very efficient because we don't pay less than salaries. That's why we are probably more efficient on this side. So this is also something really to consider, how much money they spend.
And is there an actual rating system where you can look up any charity or any NGO and see what is that metric actually? Is it impact the cost, or is it some type of efficiency metric where you can see, okay, 25% of the total funds are going into administration and 75, or I guess that remaining 75 is getting to the cause more or less?
Yes. I mean, this is definitely one of the most famous measurement donor are applying. I think very, very highly professional donors are not really looking at that ratio too much. They are much more looking at your impact report because they realize impact costs money. And you can't really just say, this is a good cost ratio and this is not a good cost ratio, because it also depends on what kind of work you're doing in the philanthropic industry. Some of the work needs or absorbs so much more labor by the NGO to achieve that outcome, meaning the cost is automatically higher. But you still need to have this outcome in order to bring the country forward. So this is why it's also a dangerous metric. So you shouldn't take it black and white, this figure. Yeah. So you really have to analyze, what is this NGO doing? For example, if you are an NGO protecting vulnerable people legally, providing legal services, obviously your cost income ratio, your cost ratio is so much higher because you're paying lawyers for this, right? So it's really, if somebody who only builds school, their cost ratio should be low because it's not so labor intensive. So that's why it's also a little bit of a tricky figure. But I think by engaging with the NGO and by talking this through with them, it makes sense, when you talk with them. And then I come to the third point, which I find very, very important for a donor who is considering giving money. Engage with the NGO. Look who is in charge and who leads this NGO and talk to these people. Best is to visit them. If you cannot, schedule Zoom meetings, schedule talks with them and talk with them, because you will feel whether they are employees working there for the salary or whether they are people who have a fire in themselves and a burning urge to help. You feel compassion and you feel energy and you feel you feel their passion for the work.
Yeah, I think that's a massive point, because I think anyone that's in charity or in NGOs needs to be passion first, not paycheck first. Absolutely. Are these charity ratings, or rather these these cost bases or cost ratios, are those reliable? Are they generally audited by anyone, or are those susceptible to corruption as well?
I think in bigger NGOs, I mean, if you really have, if you're incorporated in a decent country and you're audited and regulated by a charity board within your country, then these figures are quite reliable, obviously. I mean, there is an international audit firm looking over your books, and they see how much money you spend and how much money you get spend on projects, on salaries. They see this, and so you can basically even calculate it yourself out of the statement of operations if they don't publish it. But I think most charities do. I think it's important that charities are registered with governments because it gives you a certain layer of security that somebody is overviewing them. It's not just that they are doing something and nobody really checks on them. I think this is also important, that there is a certain oversight of charities in a country that because some people say like, oh, I'm going to go to this country and I want to build a school. I mean, you can't do this. I mean, you have to work through an NGO which is registered with that government, right? Yeah. I mean, otherwise the government will say, okay, what are you doing here?
I laughed because I started, before I met you guys, I went down that path and I'm like, got 3D renderings made. I'm like, here, I'm going to make this sustainable school in, in Cambodia. And then I started digging into it. I'm like, this is not going to happen at all. Massive failure. So
it's far more complicated. People do not realize that you need to have licenses by the government. You need to be regulated. You need to have, there are construction permits. There are, I mean, at the end of the day, the NGO industry is just an industry like every other industry. You have to follow laws and you have to cooperate with government. So
yeah. So real quick, Marc, just before we get into closing, where's Child's Dream at in terms of a cost ratio?
We are at 5.5%.
5.5. So that's administration fees, and basically 94% get to the cause.
Exactly. And the main reason for this is because we don't have fundraising expenses. I mean, we do the fundraising ourselves. It's not outsourced. So we don't have to pay companies to do fundraising for us, which is very costly.
Yeah. And Marc, is there any other organizations, any other NGOs that that do particularly great work, either in the region or elsewhere?
I mean, there are a few grassroots, I think, are doing remarkable work in the area where we work. I have a few in Cambodia I can think of. They're very, very small, I'm not even sure you find them on websites. They're mostly interventions where often we have adopted them and give them maybe half of their yearly budget because we really believe in them. Of the bigger ones, I mean, sure. I mean, when I look around in the industry, the bigger ones, I really like NGOs like Doctors Without Borders doing an amazing job. There are a few really big ones who are really also going into the right sphere, into the right, they're operating in the right place and they're having an impact because of their size. And I like what they are doing. And so even the big ones are not necessarily bad, I mean, if you like the cause of Amnesty International, if you like the cause of the WWF, then they are definitely NGOs where you can give money to, because it's simple, it's not a fraud, whatever. So you don't need to do so much, invest so much time in doing due diligence. But I think if you're really serious about donating money and becoming a bit of a philanthropist, do this due diligence, go a bit down to a bit smaller NGOs and engage with them, because it will be much more rewarding for you, because you can work with that smaller NGO. I know most of our donors, and they're coming to visit us. I mean, try to visit Doctors Without Borders or the WWF. I mean, it's much more difficult because your money goes into a fundraising department somewhere, and so you're also less important for that NGO. If you're going for a smaller professional NGO, you're much more important for them also. So there is a personal relationship between you and the charity.
Sure. And then all of the donations that Child's Dream receives, is that all from individual donors, or do you get support from governments or other like commercial sources?
We get about 5-6%, or maybe close to, let's say close to 10% we get from companies and governments. Our biggest corporate donor is a pharmaceutical company in Switzerland. And we get a little bit of money from the Swiss government, obviously, often through embassy or through the Swiss Development Corporation. But this is less than 10% of our donation volume. I mean, the majority, 90%, comes really from private individual, either through their trusts, through their foundations, through their maybe own business, through just their own pocket. Yeah, they sometimes don't have a vehicle behind it, like a trust or a foundation. They just give out of their own bank account.
Marc, it's been really, really helpful and useful. It's always great to talk to you and hear more about the work that you guys are doing. I learn more about the industry and the cause each time we speak. So I hope this conversation continues to evolve and I can support you guys and support the work that you're doing. Just before we disconnect, if other people are interested in coming to see Child's Dreams offices in Chiang Mai, are they able to meet you guys? And how else can they contribute and or donate if they're interested?
I'm sure. Definitely we love to have visitors here. You know, I mean, after 2 years of pandemic, we had hardly any visitors. I think you were one of the first ones a couple of weeks ago coming because people are not getting into the country easily. But before COVID, we had visitors all the time. I was traveling all the time. Many times I took people along when I was traveling into the field. It's the same for Daniel. We love to have people coming and engaging with us. And even if the two of us are not here in the office because we are traveling in non-COVID times, there is a team of people here who is happy to see you and talk you through the organization and show you the office here. It's an administrative office, what we are having in Chiang Mai. There are no children, but you still get a feeling, you still get the vibe of who is working here and what are we doing. And I think this is already interesting, and we really encourage people, please come and see us. So because for us it's a marketing tool and we love to see people and we love to talk about our work and to kind of infect you with the Child's Dream bug, you know, that you get this.
I love it. Well, I'm planning on coming back in about a month or two, and I think last time we talked about maybe hosting some kind of local event, both on the investing side and then having you guys there to kind of share a little bit more about the Child's Dream story and get introduced to more of the community in the area. I mean, you probably know more people than I do, but I think the more that we can bring minds together, the better. But definitely, again, thanks for thanks for the great work that you're doing and the mid career switch into philanthropy has been certainly great for the region. So I'm sure on behalf of myself and everyone else, we appreciate that you leading this cause there. It means a lot. We'll leave links to everything in the show notes. Marc, thanks again for sharing the afternoon with us.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you. And hope to see you soon in Chiang Mai. Huh?
Early childhood education should be a right, throughout the world. And I like that you asked, why isn't the government just doing it? A lot of governments just don't have the money for it. And if they do, they build in big cities, and that encourages, families to send their kids, thousands of miles away sometimes to, neighboring cities or neighboring countries. And that leads to, children get into bad situations sometimes and, getting exploited, being trafficked. I think having smaller schools or having access to a school closer to home is the answer to solving all of that, because, it keeps the family close. They can still live at home. They don't have to go into the big city. I think that's one of the worst things that's happening to all countries, is, people leave these small towns, they leave these villages because they have to go somewhere for work or they have to go somewhere for school. Well, so there is one charity in Thailand that I've actually been donating to since, I think, like way before I even had any money. I've been donating to them on a monthly basis since I want to say 2012. So it's been like 10 years now. And it's, I'm only giving them 500 baht a month. So it's not like a ton of money, but, it's been 10 years and they actually prefer it. Than having a couple $100 or even $1,000 up front, because a lot of people don't realize this, but charities, they have a lot of, fixed costs every month, and they would rather have a long-term donor that they know, it's going to be committed, and they know that money is coming every month. They know that they have a budget every month. And then kind of these one-off donations. So if you guys are ever, thinking about donating to a charity, instead of giving a lump sum, see if you can sign up for like an auto pay. Like I have mine on PayPal, and it's been literally, like clockwork. Every month for the last 10 years. They're called War Watana Muay Thai Gym. They're ran by Boom and Francis Watan. I can't say their name. Watanaya, and they started, they started just wanting to build like a ring, because they used to just fight in the dirt, because a lot of people don't realize that poor Isan region, like there's no options, like you're either a farmer or Muay Thai fighter if you're a guy.
Kids coming out of that region, I mean, it's like what we were talking about on the intro. I mean, you have no options. So you basically stay at home, be a farmer. If you're a guy, you become a Muay Thai fighter, or you go into the city and you like basically try to make a couple $100 a month. Yeah. And that's a start. That's your starting point. It's not a lot of options there.
Yeah. So, my only regret of leaving Thailand is actually not visiting this gym in person, because I've been meaning to for like literally years. Every year I'm like, this year I'm going to go. But Isan is super out of the way. Like tourists don't really go there. Like it's rural, it's like, when I go back to the US, as much as I would like to visit, I don't know what, like Wisconsin or Oklahoma. Yeah. Like, it's just like, you don't do it because it's so out of the way. Even if there's something there you want to see.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'll go check it out. Cause actually what I'm planning to do on the bike is my big goal on the motorcycle is to drive from Chiang Mai to like Nepal. But right now it's almost impossible, or it's basically impossible, because China's closed and Burma is closed because it's a military dictatorship, right? Mm-hmm. So there's really no way to get there unless I take it on a boat to India and then go up. So what I was going to do in the meantime, just to get my like legs under me on a big bike again, is just to do a 10-day tour of Isan. So right from Chiang Mai to like Surat, and then over to Ubon Ratchathani, and then up to like Udon Thani, and then back over. So I don't know where the gym is, but I'm assuming it's in Isan.
Yep.
And I'll go visit.
Dude,
go visit and give them a contribution.
Yeah. And please tell them I said hello. I do like charities like this because you can see where that money is going, and what's nice about these guys, sure. They send me, monthly photos and video updates. They're actually building a house now for the kids to live in. Also, like, I think there's so many charities, like the one you mentioned, Haiti, you just don't see where that money goes, and it feels like they're kind of just taking advantage of people's, goodwill, saying, oh yeah, let's, let's feel good about giving this money, but where does it actually go?
Yeah, I totally agree. And at the same time, it's like, it's not a good enough reason to not try to support something that you think is a good cause, because there's always going to be obstacles in the way, and people get hung up on that their whole life, and they end up just not doing anything. And I think it's a lost opportunity for yourself, because giving is not just about supporting something. It also feels good to give. It's like, it's not fully altruistic. It's also a little bit self-serving. Like when you actually see things going to good use, like you develop compassion, and I think most people that start giving, they keep giving because it feels good. But to Johnny's point, like that's why we did the playgrounds, right? Because it was like, all right, we don't want to just give a blank check to an organization. It's like our first time giving a sizable amount. So like, let's do something where we actually see what's going to go into the ground and be put to use. So we did the playgrounds, and I think we did five playgrounds in Cambodia, and Johnny and I couldn't go, but we had a good friend of ours, Fern, go to Cambodia and actually help with the installations. And it was super rewarding.
I also like the fact that with Child's Dreams, that they give the schools to the government and say, hey, we built it, but you guys need to run it. It's not sustainable for us to do it. Sure. I think that's a very good, point where it's, you kind of like, sometimes, governments need help to get started, but it needs to be self-sustainable after that.
Did he say 400? It was 400 schools they built, right?
Yeah, which is wild, right?
That's like what is that? I mean, we're talking about a big geographical area, but still, like, what does that region even look like without minus 400 schools? And just to think that it's got to be like, that's all come from individual contributions. Like state's not doing that. I don't know. It's beautiful and scary at the same time, but yeah, at least they're doing the work.
Yeah.
But hopefully we all find something meaningful. I think certainly not telling anyone to do what they do with their money. But for me, it was like, I've gotten so much joy out of that region. Not just like fun, but like great contacts, like Johnny, business opportunities, blissful moments, meditation, like all these just like great things have come out of that region for me, where it's just got this really great place in my heart. And, so I have a calling to try to give back to that. Mm-hmm. And if you're out there listening, and it doesn't have to be Southeast Asia or wherever, but if there's a place that you feel really, strongly about, and you have a piece of your heart there, and there's work that can be done to do good, try to find an outlet for it.
Yeah, I love it. And guys, if you want to share this episode with a friend, please screenshot it and just send it to a couple of friends, because our goal for 2022 is just to reach more people. We want to have a bigger impact in helping people with, along with their kind of financial journeys. We've said it many times before, we started this podcast, 5-6 years ago, to learn ourselves, like we never claimed we were experts. I think we've learned a lot in these last 5-6 years, where we're now in a position where we can help people, especially with like the one-on-one episodes and things like that, to just kind of share what we've learned when we got started. But our goal for this year is to double our audience if possible. And if every single one of you listening right now would just share this with 3 friends, that can be very easily done. So that's our goal for this year. It doesn't cost you anything, but it makes a huge impact in, your friends' lives, your family members' lives, our lives, and this is kind of our way to give back as well.
I love it. Thanks, Johnny. And thank you to Johnny and Derek also for your guys' continued commitments into this episode, cranking out episodes every single week. It's been a great start to the year so far. I think we've had some really good episodes. We're going to try to round out topics a little bit here, because it's not all about just making money and growing wealth. It's about what you're going to do with that wealth, how you're going to deploy it. And that can be lots of different ways, this being one of them. So hope you guys have had a great start to 2022. Thank you for all the 5-star reviews that have been coming in this year. Those mean a lot to us. And a big shout out to our Patreons for helping to finance the production costs of the show, including the direct costs of Derek's minimum salary.
Yeah. So Cup and Cup again. Actually, how do you say goodbye in Thai? I don't remember.
Jurgun Cup.
Jurgun Cup. Actually, I never say that. Yeah, I have no idea.
Jurgun Cup. Jurgun Puni. Jurgun Puni.
Oh, wow. Your Thai might be better than mine, buddy. All right.
Sam speak Thai good.
Again, guys. But see you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Invest Like a Boss podcast. Join our mailing list at investlikeaboss.com to get exclusive access to our insider investment folios and our private members forum.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends and leave us a review in the iTunes store. It helps more than you know. See you guys next week.